Hello, I am Jessica Ann, and today's episode of the Magnetic Muse podcast is diving deep into archetypes. And in particular, we are looking at the shadow archetype of the saboteur. In Shadow to Sovereign, we are looking at four core survival archetypes that are universal, whether you are a man or a woman, whether you're a generator or a projector, whatever you're, whoever you are, as a human walking this planet, we are being governed by archetypal forces that are driving how we perceive reality, how we perceive what's possible for ourselves. And it's an inner pattern that can either restrict us and limit us, or we can transmute it and experience its higher form. Okay. And when we are in our survival, that aspect of us tries to keep us safe in the short term. So it's very, very insular, very, very narrow. But when we are looking at our transmuted forms, when we are looking at the activated, we are able to create from a place of possibility. We're able to tap into different potentials. We're able to open up to magical ways and allow ourselves to expand, to take risks, to show up. So I want to talk about the saboteur. The saboteur is the name that was given to it by Caroline Myss, who was the originator of discovering that everyone had these four core archetypes. Um, Lenka Lutaneska has evolved the term and she calls it the logician. And I absolutely love this evolution of the shadow, because actually the logician is way more true to my own experience, and I think many other people. Yes, the saboteur is true, but when we look at the logician is the part of us that wants proof. It wants evidence, and it's a very conditioned way of thinking because, obviously we've been living in a time of science where we need to have proof and things need to be organized and categorized, and evidence needs to be provided before you can actually say, oh yeah, this is okay, this is not. So let me give you an example of how this archetype works. The role of this archetype is to protect your current identity. So it is a form of lower level logic, which is always basing its expectations on the past. So what has happened in the past, what evidence you've already got, and it disguises fear for logic, fear for reason. And if you allow yourself, if you allow this voice to drive you, you will find yourself often remaining stagnant, being in your comfort zone, putting things off, not feeling ready. And the excuses can be very, very seductive. They can make complete, perfect sense. And this can keep you stuck in positions that are holding you back from serving at a higher level, having the impact that you want, creating the money that you want, showing up in visibility, all of the things. So I'll give you an example of how you might hear this voice, and I'll give you an example of how it showed up for me and where the opposite archetype, the magician, also showed up for me. So when I allowed myself to lead from my magician, which is the transmuted version of this archetype, um, So here we go. So when you're being driven by this voice might say things like, let me think about it. Oh, I need to get all my ducks in a row. Or I know what I'll do. I will go and get a job and I will um do my videos on a Saturday and I will do these things. So it's creating what sounds really, really realistic. But if your inner voice or if your actual soul guidance is telling you to do something else that's actually going to collapse your time or is going to um, get you where you need to be a lot sooner, or in a way that you can't even imagine, you're blocking that with this need to control. So this voice of saying, "Well, I need the evidence and the proof, and I'm going to take the." It's letting yourself be led in a way that doesn't always serve you. So you've got to be aware of how this is working. So I'm a one line in human design. I'm a projector 1-3. The shadow of the one line is very similar to this logician archetype or this saboteur. Um, the one line shadow has a deep sense of insecurity and it really wants to know and have a solid foundation to feel safe in order to expand in order to feel like it's knows what it's doing, so it's confident to be able to. And safety is very, very important for expansion, you know. But the one line, like the logician, can get convinced that it needs to know more. So when we're looking at shadow, we're looking at where is this? If you can develop the objectivity to be able to observe and witness yourself, you can then start to separate where you're being guided by fear and it's holding you back, as opposed to being able to move out of and take the steps that need to be taken. So you can get lost in, I need to know more, I need to research, I'm not ready to put this thing out, I'm not ready to show up, timing is off, all these things. So a good analogy for the logician or the saboteur is think of it like this. Think of yourself as being on a beach and the sea is where you need to go to explore and to meet new opportunities and to create on a higher level. So you're on this beach and it's very, very warm. And every time you think, okay, I feel a little bit ready to go beyond my comfort zone now. I'm going to go to the sea. So you dip your toe in and you go, oh my God, no, the water's so, so cold. I'm not going to do that. I'm not ready yet. It's too cold. I'm going to go back. So I'm just going to sit down and I'll just get myself ready, ready, ready. I'll do it later. So, if, an hour or so later, or, a few hours later, you go back to the scene, you go, I'm ready now. I'm ready to ask for the raise. I'm ready to write that application for that higher level position, or I'm ready to create my podcast. And your logician will say, and you dip your toe in the water, and your logician goes, oh, I think it would be better if you actually just waited a bit and you would actually have, you'd get more out of this if you stayed in the sun a little bit more and you rested your nervous system. And so you keep going in this cycle of dipping your toe in the water, but then going back and you don't move on. You don't dive into the sea and allow yourself to feel that discomfort of the unknown, of the uncertainty, and then allow yourself to swim. But guess what happens when you do? You find that the water's really warm. It's not that cold. Your body acclimatizes. You've expanded your capacity. And now you're swimming, and it actually feels delicious. And I don't know, something comes along and something amazing happens, and that's the thing. So it will hold you back. So you've got to start learning. You've got to be able to look at where is this particular archetype holding me back. Um, So I'll give you an example of when I allowed my magician to take the reins. I mean, there's many examples I can give you, but let's look at this particular example. So in 2018, I had a dark night of the soul, and I was completely burnt out. I was exhausted. My life felt like it had no meaning. I was repeating many, many patterns in my personal life. I was overgiving, under earning, overcommitting in my teaching career. And I felt like my whole soul was just I was just there was I was a shell of a human being. I literally had no passion left, whereas everything that my whole identity was dissolving and collapsing. I didn't know who I was. I didn't even know what I liked. I didn't know what I wanted in life. I didn't have a vision for the future, and I felt very, very destabilized. And I I left my job in that December and I went to Thailand and I booked a plane for 4 weeks, travel card for 4 weeks. And while I was there, I realized that I was actually really exhausted and I needed more time. And I began to feel alive again. I was where I needed to be, and I knew on a deep, deep level this is where I needed to be. So one day I'd gone for a treatment, I'd gone for Reiki and EFT, and I was explaining to the guy that I needed to um I wanted to stay for 4 more weeks. But and he said, well, why don't you then? And I was like, I can't. Like I just can't do it. And he was like, well, that's just a belief. And so when he said that, that activated something deep in me where I suddenly realized that my whole world was being created by the assumptions and the beliefs that I was holding. So my logician was like, oh, you you don't have any money, you don't have anywhere to stay, you can't, it was just a lot of I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this. And I went and I sat and I tuned in and my spirit wanted to stay. And so I called the airline and I transferred the ticket, and so that was sorted. And then I met a lady who took me to this woman because it was high season, so there was like hardly anywhere to rent, and everywhere was really expensive, and I didn't have huge amounts of money. And because I allowed myself to say yes to the path appeared, and suddenly I'd found a beach hut which was beautiful, bit shabby, but in a beautiful location. I was happy as Larry for 12,000 baht, which is quite expensive for what it was. But anyway, the point is, the magician was leading. My soul had said, this is what you want. And rather than letting the logician lead, I surrendered and allowed the higher part of me, the wiser part of me, to see possibilities, to tune into potentials, and to allow the way to appear. And so reality began to rearrange itself for me. Now, fast forward. So, okay, couple of months later, I arrived back home. I'm suddenly in the world of I can create my own reality because I've had some consciousness that a shift in consciousness. It's like, wow, I can co-create. Like this, I can choose my thoughts, I can choose my energy, and I can actually shift things. And this was a very powerful position to be in. I began to receive guidance that I needed to go to Costa Rica. And so I went straight onto Google. I found this flight. It was £300 magic. All the other flights are like £1,000. I go to Costa Rica and I begin having dreams, and these dreams are showing me that my money's gonna run out. I go to this ATM and I have no money. I have nowhere to live. I have a dream of a crab. And that morning was the 9th of June. I go down to the beach and I see exactly the same crab. And the crab looked at me and I looked at the crab and and I just started getting connection with this crab. And then the crab ran and started climbing up this cliff edge. And it climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed. And then it fell. And it fell all the way to the bottom. And as this is happening, I'm receiving clear guidance that this is you. You need to overcome new obstacles and you need to let go of fear in order to rise and move towards your destiny. And so I went back to my place that I was staying at in Nazara, and I immediately just wrote the story. It just poured out of me. It was called The Crab and the Giant Obstacle. Um, and what I realized was that I wasn't going to go home, that I had to release all of my possessions, my social housing, and let go of everything and trust the unknown, trust that this higher part of me knew that this was the way. And that's an example of the magician coming in. And if I was being led by my saboteur or by my logician, I would have said, because I didn't have any money, I didn't have any income, but I had deep, deep knowing and deep self-trust that I would be able to create wealth or money or resources because I had a teaching career. My soul was very clear. And so I did. I rang a friend. I said, give my stuff back. And suddenly, here I am. And I remember ringing my brother, and he said to me, how much money do you have in your account? I said, I'm not going to tell you, because a lot of people were projecting huge fear onto me, but I stood my ground. I stood very strong in this knowing. And what happened was the money did run out. So what I saw, because what it led me to do was face my biggest fear. And then to discover that everything still works out. Things turn up miraculously. So what happened was I ended up in a really beautiful house in Limon in Manzanillo. And again, when I got to this house, I only had enough for 2 nights. But when I got there, my higher self and my angel said to me, this is where you need to stay for the next 3 weeks. And I was like, but I've got no money. And they were like, just book it. So again, it was, do I listen to my lower shadow, fearful mind, or do I trust this higher, wiser part of myself? And so I did, and I booked it. And it was actually there where that I began to learn how to regulate through deep uncertainty. Because it was only the night before that I left that the money, the 2.5 grand, turned up for the rent. What happened, and many of you who know my story, was I ended up traveling for a year, um, and allowing synchronicity, allowing myself to be guided by a wiser part of myself that I call the magician. So what happens when you work with your magician is that you're very decisive. You're able to make decisions. You are in a position where you have deep self-trust. Your word is your wand, and you're feeling fear, but you're not letting it lead. So what happens when you work consciously with this logician is that you move away from stagnation and you start to move into miracle zone, really, but you start moving in towards, fulfilling your desires, trusting yourself, co-creating. And I want to give you a contrast with what happened in 2025. I got to Bali in 2025, and I'll tell you about the miracles another time. But what happened was that I had been offered a supply teaching role in the UK. I'd done some supply in the July of the last year, and the school said, "Oh, will you come back in September?" And I said, "No, I'll be in Bali." And they said, "Look, this role's going to be available. Will you come back? We'll get cover for you, and you can come back in the October." So while I was in Bali, I was like, this is where I need to be. I know I need to be here. This is the place. Um, I wanted to stay, even though I didn't have huge amounts of resources. I didn't know. Um, I didn't already loads of positive like opportunities were arising, but my logician said, no, don't do what you did last time. This time, go back, take that role, work for the year, and build the Divine Femme Collective, build this body of work that is coming through you. Um, guess what happened? I came back. I After 2 weeks, I was literally told, "Oh, sorry, we're not going to hire. Like, we don't need you. We're going to hire someone." So I was literally shown what happens when you ignore the magician, when you ignore the part of you that knows the way and you take the path of fear. I think what I came up with was the logician plans and the magician laughs. Because where I thought I was, okay, I'm going to have consistent money coming in, it means I can pay my rent, I can do all of this stuff, and boom, it was taken all away. Because the lesson there wasn't really about A, following a pathway that wasn't aligned with my higher destiny. That was number one. Two, um, my lesson really was stop giving your power to external forces. Stop you the key takeaway was I am my own economy. And I needed to learn that in a very realistic way, through a real experience that had to be embodied because I can know that I am the sole like I am responsible for my financial resources, as in I can create and not give my power to outside to jobs, to other way, all of these things. That was my particular lesson. So anyway, a practice that you can to do is make one clean decision. Ask your higher self for guidance, make one clean decision from that guidance and follow through. So I'd love to hear your experiences if you already work with your logician or your saboteur. I'd like to know if you had any key takeaways from today's session. And if you want to join Shadow to Sovereign to move through integrating these shadow and to work with it consciously and to start creating from a place of more courage, creating more self-trust, more certainty, and allowing a more miraculous way of being and doing, then I would love to have you in Shadow to Sovereign. We start February the 17th. The doors are open until the 16th.